I'm Sydney Preston. I'm 32 years old. I'm a graphic designer in Phoenix, Arizona. This morning I woke up to 34 missed calls from a Minnesota number. I stared at my phone until the screen went dark, because even before I listened to a single voicemail, I already knew exactly who it was. Some memories never really leave you. They stay quiet for years, then one random morning they slam back into your chest like it all happened yesterday. For me, it was that Sunday at the church in the suburbs of Twin Cities. I was 12. My parents told me to sit on the wooden bench near the side entrance and wait for them. Just a few minutes, my mother said with a smile. We need to speak with the pastor, then we'll all go home together. I believed her. I sat there like a good girl, hands folded in my lap, watching the big wooden doors. Minutes passed. Then more. When I finally stood up and looked through the glass panels, I saw them. My parents were standing outside in the parking lot. They weren't coming back in. They were laughing. My father was holding up cash, waving it at my mother while she pointed back toward the church, toward me, and shook her head like she was winning a bet. I heard her voice carry through the cracked door. I told you she wouldn't move. $50 says she still won't find her own way home. They got in the car and drove off. That was the moment everything in my life split in two. The girl I was before that church door closed, and the person I had to become after it. I never went back to that house. Not that day. Not ever. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you the most, do me a favor, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. You're not going to believe how this story unfolds. Growing up in our quiet suburb outside the Twin Cities meant appearances were everything. To everyone else, the Hawkins family looked exactly like the kind of people you wanted living next door. My father, Jeffrey Hawkins, and my mother, Barbara Hawkins, owned a successful small chain of home furnishing stores. They sold everything from comfortable sofas to stylish lamps and kitchen tables that families gathered around on weekends. On the surface, we were the picture of hardworking, respectable middle-class life. Inside our house, though, things worked differently. Love always came with conditions, and safety depended on whether my parents were in the mood to test me. My mother loved calling her methods important lessons. If I cried too easily, I was too sensitive for the real world. If I asked for help with homework, I was becoming helpless. Every small mistake turned into an opportunity for them to prove a point. When I was 8, I begged for new winter boots because mine had holes in the soles. Instead of buying them, my parents drove me to the crowded parking lot of the big mall and told me to wait on a bench while they ran inside. This will teach you patience, my mother said before they walked away. I sat there alone for nearly 3 hours in the freezing wind, watching families come and go. When they finally returned, my father laughed and told my mother he owed her $20 because I hadn't moved from the spot. A year later, after I got upset at a school picnic when other kids excluded me from their game, they pulled the car over at a large public park as the sun was setting. Toughen up, my father said as they drove off, leaving me on the grass with no phone and no money. I sat on the curb for over an hour, arms wrapped around my knees, until they came back with drinks for themselves and no apology. Those experiences repeated in different forms throughout my childhood. A forgotten lunchbox became a reason to leave me at the store entrance. A bad mood after losing a soccer match meant standing alone outside the stadium gates. Each time, my parents framed it the same way. They were building my character. They were preparing me for real life. They never saw it as cruelty. To them, it was smart parenting, and they congratulated each other for staying consistent. I learned quickly that showing fear or sadness only gave them more material. So I stopped complaining. I stopped asking for comfort. At home, I became quiet and useful, always trying to stay one step ahead of their next test. The only place I felt truly free was on paper. I drew constantly, filling cheap sketchbooks with quiet rooms, open roads, and scenes where no one was watching me. Those drawings became my secret escape, a world where I didn't have to perform or prove anything. By the time I turned 12, I had perfected the art of staying invisible. That spring, I brought home my report card with pride because I had earned a high grade in art class, the one subject that actually mattered to me. I thought it might earn me some approval. Instead, My mother held the paper like it was evidence of a problem. My father shook his head and said maybe I was spending too much time on something that wouldn't pay the bills. That night, I heard them talking in the kitchen with low voices and occasional laughter. My mother mentioned needing a lesson I would remember for the rest of my life. My father agreed it was time. The next morning they acted unusually cheerful. They suggested we all go to church together that Sunday, just the three of us. For one brief moment I actually hoped things might be getting better. I should have known better. That Sunday the church parking lot was already full by the time we arrived. Families greeted each other with quick smiles and handshakes as they filed through the heavy wooden doors. Everything felt ordinary. My father parked the car in his usual spot, and we walked inside together like we did most weekends. Once we reached the main hall, my mother turned to me and pointed toward a bench near the side entrance with large glass panels. "Sit right here," she said calmly. "Your father and I need to speak with Pastor Ruth Callahan for a few minutes about some church business. We'll be right back and then we can all go home together." I nodded without argument and took my seat. The wood felt cool under my legs as I watched them walk down the side aisle. At first the wait didn't bother me. I counted the minutes on the big wall clock and listened to the low murmur of voices and occasional laughter around me. People moved through the hall carrying him books and coffee cups. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. I shifted on the bench and kept my hands folded tightly in my lap. 30 minutes. My stomach started to tighten. I told myself they were probably just talking longer than expected. Maybe Pastor Ruth had important matters to discuss. 45 minutes. The service in the main sanctuary had already started, and the singing drifted faintly through the walls. I stood up briefly, walked a few steps closer to the glass panels, then sat back down. An hour passed. My mouth felt dry. Every time footsteps approached from the hallway I looked up quickly, hoping to see them returning. Each time it was someone else, a parent carrying a sleepy child or an older couple heading to the restroom. Then I saw movement outside. I rose and pressed closer to the glass. There they were in the parking lot, standing next to our car. My mother was laughing, her head tilted back the way she did when she found something genuinely funny. My father held several bills in his hand, waving them as he spoke. Barbara pointed directly toward the church, straight at the side entrance where I stood watching. Jeffrey nodded and handed her the money with a wide grin. I couldn't hear everything, but my mother's voice carried clearly through the slightly open door. "I told you she wouldn't leave that spot. I bet with your dad that you couldn't even find your own way home on your own." They both laughed again. My father gave a thumbs up toward the building before they climbed into the car. The engine started. I watched the familiar taillights move slowly through the lot and turn onto the main road. They didn't look back. My chest tightened so fast I had to lean against the wall. The hall suddenly felt too large and too loud at the same time. People continued moving around me, talking about lunch plans and weekend activities, completely unaware of what had just happened. I was surrounded by dozens of families, yet I had never felt more alone. The bench I had been sitting on now looked ridiculous, like a trap I had willingly walked into. I forced myself not to cry loudly. Tears would only draw attention, and the last thing I wanted was strangers asking questions I couldn't answer. Instead I swallowed hard, wiped my face quickly with my sleeve, and stayed near the glass, staring at the empty parking space where our car had been. The singing from the sanctuary swelled again, cheerful and steady, while my hands began to shake at my sides. A woman's voice pulled me out of my panic. Pastor Ruth Callahan had been walking through the hall when she noticed me standing alone near the side entrance. She was in her early 50s, with kind eyes and a calm manner that made people trust her quickly. She asked if I was okay and why I wasn't in the service with my family. When I couldn't hold back the truth any longer, the words spilled out. She listened without interrupting, then immediately took charge of the situation. She brought me to her office, sat me down with a cup of water, and called church security first. Within minutes 2 officers from the local police department arrived. Pastor Ruth explained what I had told her while I sat quietly on the couch. One officer took notes as the other contacted Child Protective Services. They asked for my full name, my parents' names, and our home address. I answered everything I could remember. The police tried calling my parents. When my mother finally answered, I heard only one side of the conversation, but it was enough. She insisted this was simply a planned lesson to teach me independence. My father got on the line too and repeated the same thing. They were preparing me for the real world and I needed to learn how to handle difficult situations. The officer's tone changed as he listened. He told them clearly that leaving a 12-year-old child alone in a public building was not a parenting method. It was abandonment. That afternoon Child Protective Services took temporary custody. They explained I would not be going home that night. Instead, they arranged an emergency placement with a licensed foster family while the court reviewed the case. I rode in the back of a social worker's car to a house on the other side of the suburb. My hands were still shaking when we pulled into the driveway. Stephen and Donna Murray opened the door. Stephen was a high school teacher with steady hands and a quiet voice. Donna worked as a nurse and carried a gentle energy that immediately felt different from anything I had known. They didn't ask too many questions that first night. Donna showed me to a small guest room with fresh sheets and asked if I preferred the door open or closed. They simply gave me space and time. The following weeks moved slowly through meetings and evaluations. My parents showed up to the first family court hearing with a lawyer and the same confident attitude they always had at home. They admitted leaving me at the church but defended it as a necessary teaching moment. My mother spoke about building character. My father complained that society had become too soft on children. They downplayed the entire incident and suggested the court was overreacting. The judge listened carefully to the reports from Pastor Ruth, the police, and the social worker. After reviewing the pattern of previous incidents that had come to light, the court decided I would remain in foster care during the investigation. My parents were given the choice to enter a reunification program with strict requirements or voluntarily surrender their parental rights. They chose the second option after several tense hearings. That decision led me to stay longer with the Mays. For the first time in my life, I lived in a house where no one tested me or laughed at my fear. Stephen and Donna Murray became more than just foster parents during those months. They became the first adults who made me feel truly safe. The first few weeks with the Mays felt completely foreign to me. Stephen and Donna never tested me. If I got scared at night, they didn't laugh or tell me to toughen up. Donna would simply sit on the edge of the bed and ask if I wanted the hallway light left on. Stephen made sure I knew exactly when he would be back from the store, and he always kept his word. Their home operated on consistency instead of surprises, and that alone took me months to trust. During that time the court process continued. My biological parents attended the required meetings but grew increasingly frustrated with the supervision and requirements. They hated having their parenting examined by outsiders. After several months of back-and-forth hearings, they made their final choice. They voluntarily surrendered their parental rights rather than continue under court monitoring. The decision came through on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Not long after, the adoption was finalized. I officially became Sydney Preston. The name felt strange at first, like putting on new clothes that didn't quite fit yet, but I chose it because it belonged to the life I was starting. Not the one I had left behind. Even with kind people around me, healing didn't happen quickly. I still panicked whenever anyone said they would be right back. If Donna went to the grocery store, I caught myself watching the clock and pacing near the window until her car returned. Waiting in any public place made my hands sweat and my breathing shallow. I developed a constant alertness, always scanning for signs that someone might leave me. Those habits had been drilled into me for years, and my body refused to forget them overnight. Stephen and Donna handled my fears with patience I had never experienced. They never rushed me to act normal or pretended the past didn't exist. When they saw how much I loved drawing, Stephen cleared a space at the dining table and bought better sketchbooks and pencils. Donna encouraged me to join an after-school art club and never complained about the mess of papers I left scattered around my room. They attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and listened when I wanted to talk about small things. They celebrated good grades without attaching conditions to their approval. Slowly, very slowly, the tight knot in my chest began to loosen. I started sleeping through the night more often. I stopped flinching every time a door closed. The mays didn't demand gratitude or instant affection. They simply stayed, day after day, showing up in the quiet ways that mattered most. For the first time I understood that safety didn't have to be earned through performance. It could simply exist. By the time I entered high school I had begun to believe that maybe I could build something new. The nightmares became less frequent. My drawings grew bolder. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't feel like running away from something. High school graduation gave me the push I needed to leave Minnesota behind. I received acceptance to a strong art program in Arizona and made the decision to move across the country. The first year in Phoenix felt overwhelming, but the distance brought a new kind of freedom. The dry desert air and open skies slowly helped me breathe easier. I focused completely on my studies and graduated with a degree in graphic design. After college I started working at a small branding agency in downtown Phoenix. I learned fast and built a reputation for clean, honest designs that helped local businesses tell their stories. Within a few years I took the risk and opened my own studio. It began as a one-room space with second-hand furniture, but steady clients allowed me to grow it into a proper office. The work felt meaningful because I could help people present themselves clearly to the world, something I had struggled with for so long. I met Derek through mutual friends at a neighborhood barbecue. He was a software engineer with a calm presence and a dry sense of humor that never felt forced. Our relationship developed slowly and honestly. On our fifth date I told him about my complicated past. He listened without offering empty comfort or trying to fix anything. He simply said it shouldn't have happened and that he respected the life I had built. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony with close friends. It was quiet, warm, and exactly what I wanted. Our life in Phoenix settled into a peaceful rhythm. I ran my studio with a small team, taking on projects I cared about while keeping healthy boundaries. Derek and I supported each other's work without pressure. We adopted a rescue dog named Buddy, a mixed breed with one floppy ear who followed me around the house like a shadow. Weekends often meant morning hikes in the desert or quiet evenings on our back patio. For the first time I had a home that felt safe and chosen. I cut off all contact with the Hawkins family many years earlier. I blocked every number, email address, and social media account they tried to use. I changed my phone number twice and kept my personal profiles private. The few times a message slipped through, I deleted it immediately. That chapter stayed closed, and I intended to keep it that way. Until this morning. I woke up to my phone showing 34 missed calls from a Minnesota area code. The voicemails came from Alexis, my younger sister. I hadn't heard her voice since she was a little girl. Now it sounded older, tired, and determined. She said our parents needed to speak with me. She said things had fallen apart for them and they were asking for me. Her message ended with a simple request for me to call back when I was ready. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, staring at the screen while Buddy rested his head on my knee. Derek watched me quietly from across the room. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the past had found a way back in. I finally sat down and played the voicemail. Alexis's voice filled the kitchen. She sounded older than I remembered, with a roughness that came from real life pressing down. She didn't waste words. Our mother had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. Our father had suffered a stroke 6 months earlier and still struggled with basic movements. The family stores had closed one by one. Customers stopped coming after the old church incident resurfaced in a local community Facebook group. Someone had posted about it, others added details, and the story spread quickly through the suburb. The respectable image my parents had spent decades building collapsed almost overnight. Alexis told me she had cut contact with them completely. After she became a mother herself, she requested the old court records to understand what really happened when I disappeared from the family. Reading those documents changed everything for her. She said she could never let her own child near people who treated their daughter that way. Her voice stayed steady, but I could hear the exhaustion behind it. She wasn't calling to beg on their behalf. She simply thought I deserved to know the truth directly instead of through rumors. I listened to the message 3 times. Then I sat quietly for a long while. That evening I talked with Derek first. He listened carefully and reminded me I owed them nothing. Whatever choice I made had to be for my own peace, not their comfort. The next day I called Stephen and Donna Murray. Their voices brought the familiar steadiness I had come to rely on over the years. Donna told me to trust my instincts. Stephen said some doors should stay closed, but only I could decide if this one needed a final conversation. Both of them offered to support me no matter what I chose. I thought about it through another sleepless night. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it never arrived. Another part knew the only way to truly close this chapter was to face them one last time. Not to forgive. Not to help. Just to speak in my own voice and walk away on my terms. 2 days later I booked a flight to Minnesota. Derek offered to come with me, but I told him I needed to do this alone. I packed lightly and tried to keep my mind focused on the present. The past had stayed silent for nearly 20 years. Now it was demanding attention, and I refused to let it control me again. As the plane lifted off from Phoenix, I stared out the window at the desert disappearing below. I wasn't going back as the scared 12-year-old they had left behind. I was going back as Sydney Preston, the woman who had built a life they could never touch. I didn't know exactly what I would say when I saw them, but I knew one thing clearly. This visit would be the final page of that old story. The hospital corridor in Minnesota felt colder than I remembered. I walked to the room number Alexis had sent and paused outside the door for just a moment before stepping inside. Jeffrey and Barbara Hawkins looked smaller than I had imagined. My father sat in a chair by the window, one side of his face still showing the effects of the stroke. My mother lay in the bed with tubes connected to her arm, her face pale but her eyes sharp as ever. For several seconds nobody spoke. I stayed standing. "I'm not here to stay," I said. "I came because I wanted to say this in person." My mother's voice was weaker than before but still carried that familiar tone. "Sydney, we made mistakes. We were trying to teach you strength." I looked directly at her. "You left me at the church when I was 12. You stood in the parking lot laughing and betting money on whether I could find my own way home. That wasn't a lesson. That was cruelty. And you both enjoyed it." My father tried to speak but I continued. "You spent years turning fear into entertainment. You called it parenting. The court saw it differently. The community sees it differently now too. That's why your stores are gone. That's why you're here alone. You lost both your daughters because you refused to admit what you did." Barbara's eyes filled with tears. "We're your parents. We're family." "You stopped being my family the day you drove away laughing," I replied. "I have a family now. A husband who doesn't test me. Parents who never laughed at my fear. A life I built without you. I won't pay your bills. I won't manage your care. I won't visit again. This is the last time you will ever see me." Jeffrey looked down at his hands. Barbara reached out weakly but I stepped back. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the room without looking back. The drive back to the airport felt strangely light. On the flight home to Phoenix I watched the clouds below and thought about the girl I had been and the woman I had become. The distance between those two versions was no longer painful. It was proof. Family is not always blood. Sometimes it is the people who choose to stay and do the work of loving you properly. Healing is not about forgetting what happened. It is about refusing to let it define your future. Real strength comes from building a life so solid that the people who once tried to break you no longer have the power to reach you. I landed in Phoenix as the sun was setting. Derek waited for me at arrivals. When I saw him I smiled for the first time in days. I was exactly where I belonged.